Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, we are taking a look at a new build, kind of. It's actually an old build that's been reformatted for Murkmire, to a degree. So if you guys don't know the Knights Templar build that I made back here in Clockwork City, it ran two very distinctive sets, and it ran, instead of monster sets, it ran a sword and board, and I think it was dual sword and board. But yeah, I did some changing of that. I did some major adjustments to it, and I kind of took this back to an old build I used to play on live. And it's very similar to the Avenger in a way. It's a more of a in-your-face tank type build, and it's got some damage behind it. Not a lot, but enough, and it really helps when you're in a group. So yeah, so this build itself is made for dungeon runs. It is not made for trials, unless you want to off-tank and your group will allow it. And yes, it would be able to tank, off-tank most trials, I would say, pretty well. I'm not sure how well, but it works out. But let's go ahead and get into the build. Looking at the stats, we have a 12,000 Magicka, 35k health, 24k stamina. We are a Wood Elf Templar for this. Wood Elf is not ideal. It just works really well for some reason because of the stamina recovery. If you look, our stamina recovery is coming in at 1298. When we use our pots, it comes in at 1491, almost 1500, and then we get 1,000 Magicka recovery. We do have a 2,500 weapon damage with a 38% crit. Yes, it's important because this build can also be used in Overland for questing, for other things you might want to do. And even though it has no crit resist, you can adjust that and make this build viable for PvP. Yeah, it's pretty scary. It's scary all around because it works in so many different areas. So let's go ahead and go on down here to the rest of it. So we do have Major Savagery at all times because we have Expert Hunter equipped. I know, odd for a tank, but you'll understand why in a minute. We do have the Warrior Mundus Stone, another odd one for a tank, because we do want to do some damage with this build. I know, seems odd, but most dungeons, like, you don't have to have a tank that stands and holds block. There are some that you do have to, but this build is made to do that and tank at the same time. So you have a lot of choices here. Now we are using Dubious Cameron Throne for the max health, max stam, and stam recovery. We still have 35k health. This is going to be perfect for dungeon play. And yes, it does work in Dragonstar Arena, and it can work in the new dungeon, or the new arena, the Black Rose Prison. It's a little awkward in there, but it can be done. Alright, let's go on to the gear now. Remember, Dubious Cameron Throne is going to be your food. Tripods are going to be your best friend for return of resources. You're not going to be using them a whole lot, mainly in those moments where you've used a lot of resources for things, but most of the time you won't need it. If you do, you have it. Alright, now let's go on to the gear sets. Starting with the monster set, we are using Swarm Mothers. This is by far the best for a Templar. We don't have chains, and using the silver shards can be really stressful on a tank because it does use stam. So using this to pull enemies is a lot better because all you have to do is block, and if they're more than 5 meters away, you'll pull them to you. So it really works out against those ranged targets and stuff. The next set we're running is Kvetch's Gladiator. I know, it's odd. Why a tank with Kvetch's Gladiator? Here's why. When the target is below 25% health, you add 1,800 weapon damage to your light and heavy attacks. But we have more bonuses than that when the enemy is below 25% health that allows us to boost our damage a little bit more so we can actually get some decent damage out of this build. But you don't want to start doing that really heavy attacking on the boss until it's in that burn phase. Alright, So moving on, the other set we are using is Plague Doctors. Plague Doctors is by far the best for any race that doesn't have a high health threshold. So like Wood Elves, Red Guard, Khajiits, High Elf, things like that. They work a lot better with this. Now a High Elf does play good with this build as well, because it'll give you more magic recovery, but you lose a lot of stam recovery and you lose a lot of max stam. So not quite as good, but it still works. Going over the traits and the enchants, we are running 3 infused on the big pieces. This is going to give us the most in our stats. We are running tri-stats in those, and we are running a tri-stat in the shield, and it is sturdy. Now going over the small pieces, the smaller pieces are sturdy, so we do get a 20% block when we're on the front bar, or 20% reduced block on the front bar. But on top of that, we also have another 20% from our champion points and 36%. So we have a 76% reduced cost of blocking with this, and this saves us a ton of resources. It really does. Now, if you're playing a Nord, I would suggest going sturdy on all the gear. This way you're going to get even more block costs. But it's only like, I think it's like 88% or something like that. So you still get a lot of block cost reduction, but you don't get right now you're at 76, so the other one you're at 88. So it's still going to cost you to block, but with Nord you get a lot more in health, so you can run sturdy here. And with them having the same 6% stam, you'll reach the health threshold faster, 35k, with a greater stamina pool. But your stamina recovery sucks, so you have to use Repentance instead of the skill we do run. So that's kind of a bad one. Now, going on to the jewelry, we are running 2 healthy on the rings with weapon damage. I know, awkward again. And then we're running a infused with a magic recovery. The reason for the magic recovery is we don't get it from any of our gear pieces, and we want to get our magic recovery to about 1,000. So that way we have a way of getting resources in with or without anything else. So moving on to the sword and board, like I said, sturdy shield, tri-stat. On the smaller pieces here, you'll see I'm running health enchants too. So with those sturdy pieces. And then on the weapon itself, the main weapon, we are using a Crusher enchant with weapon with the infused enchant. So we do get a lot more penetration on the enemies. And we are using a weapon damage enchant on the back bar with infused. Now, a lot of people are going to say, tanks can't be DPS. You're not there to do DPS. You're there to boost other things. All this damage is to boost your damage when an enemy's at a certain threshold, below 25%. Because then your light and heavy attacks get 1,800 more weapon damage. In between that time, up until that time, it's mainly the boost in weapon damage is there for one skill. And now let's move on to the skills so we can talk about that. Looking at our passives though, you want to make sure you get all the class passives for this. It's really important. On to the one-handed sword and shield, yes, all passives. Bow, all passives. We are using a bow back bar. Medium armor, light armor, top 3, medium armor, top 2, bottom 1, these are important. Heavy armor, all of them. The reason why these are important on this is this gives you a little bit more crit. This here will give you stam recovery, 4%, and it gives you 2% reduced cost. If you didn't know, Templars do get 4% reduced cost in Magicka, Stamina, and Ultimate. So that 2% from the light armor piece and the other one gives you a 6% reduced cost in Magicka and Stamina. And they also give you 4% more stam recovery and magic recovery. Now, we do have a little bit of extra magic recovery, so that really helps. And we also get the dodge roll passive on the bottom piece here. Now, heavy armor, you want to make sure you get all the passives. Juggernaut, you definitely want that 10% max health. Rapid mending, you want that extra healing. And then, of course, revitalize, the return of stamina when you do a heavy attack. So, soul magic, Definitely want these two. You can be a vampire with this, but if you're going to be a vampire, Dark Elf is going to be better. Moving on, Fighters Guild. Get all the passives. You want all the passives on the Fighters Guild. We are running Flawless Dawnbreaker and this, so that Slayer passive comes in at 6% on the front bar. On the back bar, it comes in at 3%, so really good. And we also get Banish the Wicked, which helps us generate ultimate. If you are in a dungeon where you're fighting like undead ads and stuff like that, you can kill them and get the ultimate, so it'll help you be able to drop more Warhorns or more Dawnbreakers. In dungeons, I use Dawnbreaker all the time. I don't even waste my time with Warhorn most of the time. Warhorn does help, though. Mage's Guild, you just need Persuasive Will. Psijic Order, you can... I would say suggest unlocking them all if you're going to use Meditate. But you don't really need Meditate because even the 5k shield and the damage reduction isn't needed. Moving on to Undaunted, you want these Undaunted passives. We do have Inner Beast unlocked. It is a stamina taunt. It is not the magical one, it is the stamina one. The reason I use the stamina one is because I can return resources really fast on the stamina, so I'm not worried about it. Moving on, Assault. You definitely want to get Vigor and Warhorn on here. And then moving on over here to your racials. The reason I choose Wood Elf is the 21% stam recovery. It's ridiculous. When you're in heavy armor, you don't have good stam recovery. Wood Elf gives you really good stam recovery. So, we also get this, which is the max stam, 6%, and we also get disease and poison resistance. This applies to physical resistance, so we actually get a lot more reduction in poison and disease damage. And then we have Stealthy, which reduces our radius of stealth detection. We don't really need that, but... Alchemy, medicinal use, really, really good. Definitely need that. And then on Provisioning, Gourmand and Connoisseur. Now, going over the skills. Starting with the first one, we do have Pierce Armor. This applies Major Breach, Major Fracture. It is our taunt. It does do a decent amount of damage and stuff, but we mainly have it for the Major Breach, Major Fracture. Next up, we are using Heroic Slash. I never used to use this skill, but I realized with the Ultimate Gen, you definitely want this, especially with how this build plays. So this does damage, it does do a CC, it does apply Minor Maim to only one target. That's kind of the downfall of it. And then the Minor Heroism granting to you is really good. Moving on, we do have Blazing Shield. We have this because we need a shield that's going to keep us alive in certain situations. This shield is 34% of your max health, but it increases in size by 4% for each enemy near you. So you can get this shield pretty big in dungeons when you have a lot of trash around you. And it makes it harder for them to diminish the shield. So when they do diminish the shield, though, it explodes outward, dealing 34% of the damage that's done. But because of a certain passive, we can actually get a little bit more damage out of it, dealing up to an additional 3,880 physical damage. So it's pretty nice to have that extra damage buff in there. So, and just to show this, because I wanted people to see, if I have this up, my weapon damage, this actually goes to 4,325 damage when it explodes. So really good when that shield explodes and it does that extra damage. It can help bring down those ads really fast. Moving on though, next skill we have is Vigor. Now Vigor is here because I like having a nice heal that I can throw out on myself and my allies. And if you look, the thing can heal for 3,380, but if my weapon damage is up, the thing can go up to almost 4k on myself and 2k on roughly about 3k on my allies. So it's really still a good one to have. Next, we have Evil Hunter. We have this here for one reason, guys, to boost our light and heavy attack damage. Because of the way this build works, and getting that enemy below 25% health, you want to be able to get your crits off with those light and heavy attacks. You're not going to be using Pierce Armor and Heroic Slash as your spammables. Your heavy attacks and your light attacks are going to be your spammables. And again, a lot of people will ask, well, this isn't going to be a lot of damage that those things do. This is a bad concept, but as you guys, because it's not below 25% health, but our heavy attacks can come in at 8k, averaging 5k, and our light attacks can come in at 4k, averaging 2.8k. This is as much damage as most tanks do DPS-wise, is about 2k. This one can pull a little bit more. If you've got a really good rotation, or you got a really good setup for it, and you know how to fight a boss, and know when to block, when to avoid damage, that kind of thing, you can actually play this like a DPS. And yes, you can get some decent damage out of it. In fact, I've gotten up to 10k with this. 10k doesn't seem like a lot, but you take that 10,000 and multiply it, because that's 10k a second. Now you multiply it by however many seconds it took you to defeat that boss, and that's how much damage you've done in total. Now you add that to that total of what your DPS did and your healer did, and now you'll see, oh wow, this guy actually does some damage, and these other people, you know, were doing their damage, but this guy was helping out. The whole idea behind Elder Scrolls is not just one type of tank, but a multitude of types of tanks. And yes, it is possible to play a tank that does damage. So, alright. Besides the Evil Hunter, the next ability we do have on our bar is Flawless Dawnbreaker. It doesn't seem like it does a lot of damage because it seems so low. But when you're fighting a boss that damages 10k over 5 seconds, that's pretty good. And then on top of that, while slotted, we get 5% more damage. So this boosts our weapon damage. And if you didn't know about the Templar, we do have Blessed Warrior. Our weapon damage is increased by 6% and our spell resist by 2,640. This is what makes them really good with Sword and Board. Sword and Board, you get a 5% increase in weapon damage, and this gives you an 11%. Now, no other tank can play like a Templar can with Sword and Board, because we actually do get more damage out of it. And then when you add something like Flawless Dawnbreaker to it, we actually get a 16% increase in our weapon damage in total without any buffs, without using a power pot or anything like that. We get almost 20%. So, now if you were using a power pot, you would actually get a lot more, because you'd get 20% added on to that 16%. But we can't do that as a tank. Not unless you're an Argonian. But yeah, that's the front bar. Moving on to the back bar. Now this is where you can put the ranged taunt if you feel you need it from the Fighters Guild. Or Undaunted, the Inner Beast. If you want to put it here, you can. But I prefer Venom Arrow to hit my range targets with, because if they're casting, I can set them off balance, and then it'll stun them for 3 seconds, but they'll turn to attack me, and all I have to do is throw up a block, and I'll pull them to me with my monster set. So this is my range taunt. Because the first enemy to do damage to them is going to draw their attention. Next up, we have Endless Hail. We have this here to keep up that weapon damage enchant. It does do decent damage. Not a lot, but it does do a decent amount. And then next up, we do have Power of the Light. This is basically for group damage. Now, as you can see, this does 3,000 damage to the target, copying up to 20, copying the damage up to a certain amount. And then it deals an additional 20% of it as physical damage. So it will soak up damage, and then it does damage. And it can do a total of 14,226. But that is when we're on our back bar. So if we swap bars, let me do this again. And if we swap bars, it actually goes up a little bit higher. It goes to like 15,000. So it's really nice. It also applies Minor Breach and Minor Fracture, which really helps in dungeons, because you don't have a lot of penetration in dungeons. This just adds more to allow your DPS greater damage. Next, we have Channeled Focus. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, why not Ruin Focus? That's going to give you stamina back, because we don't need more stamina back. We already get enough. What we need is Magicka. Now, I know people are going to be like, yeah, but when you block, you're going to get stamina back. I'm not worried about that. A heavy attack will give me my resources back. Like I said, in dungeons, you don't have to perma-block. Not even in trash fights. Because your healer should be doing their job. And if not, you got Vigor. And being a Templar, you can drop this down, get 8% more healing, now your vigor is going to hit you for more. And especially if your weapon damage is boosted up. Then your vigor should be hitting you for more, but for some reason there's some weird stuff going on. But yeah. So yeah, we have that. Next ability again, Evil Hunter. We want it here as well because we want those crits on both bars. And then next up, because we will be proccing that 1800 weapon damage even on the back bar or light attacks. So when the enemy gets below 25% health, I go into DPS mode. And usually I can pull in that area, my DPS will go up to about 11, 12k because I have that 1800 extra weapon damage. But we also have Warhorn back here. Now this is where I use Warhorn. I save my Warhorn. I use Dawnbreaker a couple times in a boss encounter. Save my Warhorn until it gets 25%. Pop it. Guess what I get? Major Force. And not only do I get it, but my group gets it as well. So I can boost my critical damage by 15% and their critical damage by 15%. On top of that, we also get Max Magicka and Max Stamina, which boosts my damage all across the board. So, in the long run, this build works out really well in dungeons, because if you want to speed clear it, you want to get through it fast, if you're farming it for certain sets, or you're helping somebody get something, this is a really good tank build for it. So all the weapon damage, all that stuff, is not to boost your damage for certain things, but mostly for one skill, Vigor. Vigor heals for a lot when you have extra weapon damage. So we want to boost that up as high as we can get it. We want to boost our shield damage, blazing shield damage, because when it explodes and it only does 34% of the damage going out, when you have a lot of enemies around you, you have a greater chance of proccing that explosive damage from Burning Light. So we want to do that damage. This helps clear trash a lot easier. This helps clear ads on bosses. And when you're playing in the Black Rose Prison, this damage is essential, because this helps you clear ads faster. Because you don't want a bunch of ads running around stacking up on you. So this way you can draw their attention, keep them close by, and let the explosion go outwards. Because this thing does have a 5-meter radius around it when it explodes. So really, like I said, it's really good for those trash fights. Alright, now, moving on to our CP. Now, CP... pretty standard setup here. We have 66 in Ironclad. This reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 22%. We have 31 into Thick Skin, reducing damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. We do get 8% damage reduction when we apply our shield for 3 seconds. And in some encounters, that 3 seconds that the shield's up, it'll be removed. And it's very few and far between. It depends on the hit. But yeah, it can be removed. 12k doesn't last long, but it can last a while. So this can actually be, the next two can actually be boosted to 20%. So we have Hardy. This reduces damage taken from physical poison and disease damage by 12%. On top of that, we get another 8%. So we can actually get this up to 20%, and it's pretty nice. We have 56 in Elemental Defender. This reduces Flame, Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 12%. Again, with our Blazing Shield, 20% for 3 seconds. Kinda nice. Moving on over here, we have 40 into Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. Definitely necessary. Otherwise, you only get a 10k shield with this. And I like getting that 12k shield. So... we do have 19 into Quick Recovery, increasing our healing received by 5%, and we have 2 into Heavy Armor Focus. Now, if you wanted to get a little bit more physical resistance, because it is a lot lower than your spell, you can take that 19 out of Quick Recovery and put it into your Heavy Armor Focus. I would suggest not doing that, because you still have really high resistances, even without. So we go to 27k physical, 30k spell, we're still in a very good range for our resistances. Then when you add this on top of this, is actually like 47%, I think, mitigation on your shields. So when you bop your shields, you still get really good mitigation on your shields when this is up. So you want to be in this and have it up, and you can't even block. So if you do get hit by a major hit, it strips your shields, the block will cover it, and you take less damage. So, alright. Moving on now to the green tree. We have 40 into Warlord. This reduces our break free cost by 16%. You can take this up to 56, but it does put a strain on you a little bit because of the way we set up our the rest of our green tree. I like 40 into here. I like reducing that break free cost. So 21 into bashing focus. This gives us a 13% reduced cost in bashing. It's 1% off from where I like it, which is at 23. But I need those points elsewhere. Moving on, we do have 43 into Mooncalf. This increases stam recovery by 10%. 43 into Arcanist, increasing our magic recovery by 10%. And 43 into Tenacity, increasing our magic and stamina of our fully charged heavy attacks by 10%. Remember, wearing heavy armor, you get 25% return on your attacks. So this makes it 35. Then you add in the fact that we get 30 baseline. So we actually get 65% of the resource back. Moving on, we have 56 in the Shadow Award, reducing our block cost by 20%. That 20%, along with the 20% we get from Sturdy, the 36% we get from Sword and Shield, we actually have a 76% block cost reduction. Alright, we do have 23 into Tumbling. This increases or reduces your dodge roll cost by 10%. You have such a decent resource pool and stamina return that dodge rolling isn't going to be really bad as long as you're not spam rolling. As long as you're not sitting here bouncing around like a freak, you should be okay. You should only need to dodge roll certain attacks anyways. Alright. So moving on to the blue tree, we have 43 into Bless. This increases our healing done by 10%. We also get another 8% for standing in our circle, our channeled focus. So those two things give us 18% healing done. So that's really, really good. Moving on over here, we do have 35 into Physical Weapon Expert. This increases our light and heavy attacks with our one-handed sword and shield by 20%. Now I know, why do I want so much in here? Because I have 40 into Mastered Arms. This increases my direct damage done with my attacks, my light and heavy attacks, by 16%. It also boosts a few other things, but mainly our light and heavy attacks, our Pierce Armor, and our Heroic Slash. But this boosts our light and heavy attacks. That's where most of our damage comes from because of Butcher. Increases the damage done by light and heavy attacks by 5% to enemies below 25% health. So our light and heavy attacks are boosted by 25%. Then you add in that 1800 weapon damage, along with this 12%. So we go up to 30 or 25, 37% more damage on our light and heavy attacks, because that is considered physical damage, and Mighty does boost our light and heavy attacks. So that's why we have this. We also get Reposit, and as you can see, it does 4,910 damage whenever I block an attack and I deal damage back to the enemy. I have a 15% chance of doing that. That's another way that really helps out, because if you have this and you have your Blazing Shield up and you're doing this, you can still proc Reposit even with your shield up. So I can be dealing damage back to the enemy, and then when my shield explodes, it's going to deal that damage back to them with the Reposit, but it also has a chance again for Burning Light to do more damage. So I can actually do a decent amount of damage just blocking. And yes, I've killed many enemies just doing that. Alright, so moving on to the last and final of the blue trees, there's a reason why I have this set up the way I do. I have 56 in here, increasing physical poison disease damage by 12%. We do have Venom Arrow. It does poison damage, so 12%, pretty nice. But we have 40 into Thaumaturge to increase that damage. Just for that. Then we have 56 in a precise strikes. This increases our critical healing and our critical damage. Now, the cool thing about Templars is we have Piercing Spear. With an Adric Spear ability slotted, your critical damage is increased by 10%, and you increase the damage done to blocking targets by 10%. If an enemy blocks and this goes off, this is boosted by 10%, because it will do that damage to them. But if it does critical damage, this can crit. If it does critical damage, that damage is boosted by not only 20% from our CP, but another 10%. So we actually get 80% more damage to our enemies. This build is not bad, guys. It's actually really good. With the 38% crit, we actually crit quite often. Not insanely often, as you can see over here. We crit maybe 43% of the time. But even 43% of the time, we have 80% critical damage. We also have an 8,708 pen. On overland mobs, you're going to have no problem killing them. This thing will mow through them. On trash, like in dungeons, you might not get the greatest damage, but you do a decent amount. So, I mean, they still have 10k resistances, 9k roughly left, but, well, 9,500. But still, they take a decent chunk of damage. And that's kind of the point, is you still can do a lot with this build. Even though it doesn't look like it, you can. Now, this was tested here in this, but we're going to go ahead and take this build now that you've seen the CP. We're going to go to my favorite testing ground for any tank, and that is Mauve Lorcage. And before I do that, I want to make sure that it is set to Veteran. Now, the only thing that sucks about this build is in, like, Mauve Lorcage, your buff, your resistance buff, you have to stay out of the circles of the spellcasters, otherwise you can't cast it. So it's important to make sure that when you're doing certain trials, like, you stay out of certain areas. Like, you gotta be very movable with this build. And that's why we have the dodge roll reduction by 10%. We have some other things. We actually have a 14% dodge roll reduction, which isn't too bad. But we want that high stam and magic recovery, so... Now, I'm just doing this so I can show you guys what I mean by this thing's damage output when enemies are in certain ranges, things like that. Because even on trash fights, it's important for everyone to be contributing. If you have an off-tank who isn't doing enough damage, this is a great build for an off-tank to do more damage.
The lost cats are nearby. Be wary.
Alright, that was a bad one. I was trying to get those ads over to me, because I like to keep all the ads as close as possible, so... My bad. I make mistakes, everyone does. So, here, we'll just go in here and we'll just go all tankscape on him. I like to start with Vigor. And usually I don't need to block that much when I'm on trash fights. I just keep my shield up and Vigor going. Keep this buff. I don't even worry about the Endless Hail too much. Or not Endless Hail, the Poison Injection, unless I can see like those casters and I can do this when I see them getting ready to cast something. And usually I have my camera like this. So let me go ahead and get a few of these enemies below that threshold. There we go. We got a nice crit out of there. If you guys didn't see that, we got a 9k crit out of our blazing shield. I'm gonna go ahead and use a pot. Here we go. Enemy below 25% health. Here we go, another 9k, almost 10k crit on the blazing shield proc, burning. Go ahead and get some of these other spellcasters over by me. There we go. Now we got all of them. We got 12k almost on the heavy attacks. Our light attacks, if I can get a light attack to crit, I'll see. But I think you know, and everyone's like, oh, damage, tanks, no damage, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know what planet you guys are from, but just because you don't see, like, absurd numbers like 56k doesn't mean a tank can't do damage. Tanks always do damage. But it's the whole vigor thing that everyone, or not vigor, it's the Ebon armor. Now, if you want to play a this build with Ebon, you can. You're just not going to have 35k health. But there's a reason why we go for the high stam recovery. Yeah, there's like 7k on the heavy, on the light attacks almost. But that just shows you, like, I mean, just to give you guys an idea, yeah, it was 8k damage. But again, if you look at, like, what our Blazing Shield was doing, our Blazing Shield was doing 4,000 something. And then, I think you can see it in here. Burning, no, it's not in here. I think it's in this area. Nope, it's not even in this area, the burning one. Sun Shield hit bonus, there we go. So there was times we were getting hit up to 21 times. We absorbed up to 21 things. Total, and that was times 1, 29, 28, 21, you know, 18, this. And then this explodes, so it was dealing this. But it, for some reason, it's not showing the, there we go, Burning Light. Was hitting for 5,773. So between the two, that was 10k damage. And I did see several crits of Burning Shield for 9k. So, again, heavy attacks hitting for 11, 6k average. Light attacks hitting for 6, almost 7k, 4k average. And this is when they're below 25% health. So this is why I like this build. I know a lot of people complain that tanks can't do, just don't do enough because they have such low stat pools and everything like that. But when you put them in a set that gives them 1,800 extra weapon damage when the enemy's below 25% health, you have DPS in there with you, and you can actually focus more on doing damage. You're not sitting there going, you know, whatever. You can actually pull a decent amount of damage with this build. It's not insane. Like I said, 10k doesn't seem like a lot, but when you add that 10k to, say, 15k of what a healer can do, a good healer, and then the let's just say averaging 40k on the DPSs, not between both of them, but to get like each, so 40k each. If you had 2 DPS doing 40k, a healer doing 15k, and a tank doing 10, say 12k, just say 12, because of that below 25% health. Hypothetically, all of this, when you see something like that, the amount of damage that you can do in total then, would be almost 70-80k. Instead of building a DPS that does some absurd amount of damage, like 60k, your tank doing nothing, your healer doing nothing, you're having to compensate for your tank and healer not bringing any damage to the group. When your tank and healer bring damage to the group, then things change. Now you've got a tank and healer doing damage, and you've got those 2 DPS that don't have to build so absurdly. They can actually kind of lower it down some to, say, 40,000 or 34,000 even, because your tank and healer are going to compensate for their loss. And you're going to make up the difference. Now, a lot of people say that a tank has to play like this all the time. You don't have to play this way all the time. If you have a shield in trash fights, you don't need to block. Even on bosses, most of the damage can be avoided on bosses by using a shield. The only tank that cannot do that right now is the DK's shield, because it's garbage. They nerfed it way too much. Unless you have 40k health, that shield still sucks. You gotta have like 60k health to make that shield worthwhile. But when you have a Templar who can pop a shield, get 12k, that's fine. Go ahead and beat on me. Because 12k is more than enough. Then you look at Sorks, they can get a 12k health and 35k with their own shield. Bone Shield would give you 12k. DK is nice because it applies a shield to everyone. But it's not super great anymore, like I said, because of the nerf. It's nice because of the major mending, but that's about it. And even that's not necessary on a DK. But I'm not here to talk about that tank. I'm not talking about tank, that kind of stuff. I'm here to talk about this tank and why it works and why it's so good. And it's really powerful. Now, that 1800 weapon damage only applies to light and heavy attacks. But when you have Blazing Shield up, and it's proccing the Burning Soul and everything, you have Endless Hell going, you have all that stuff going, you can actually keep your DPS pretty high. It's not impossible either. It's just a lot of naysayers that say that a tank can't do any damage. So, but they can. It's not insane damage, but no tank ever does insane damage. You know, most MMOs, a tank does between, like, when it comes to the top DPS of the group, your tank, your main tank, will never be doing more than, say, 10% of their total damage. Of that one person. So if that person's doing, say, for World of Warcraft, I've seen DPS get up to, like, 100 million. Your tank should be able to do 10 million DPS a second. And that's not impossible. I have my tank over there, my tank in World of Warcraft, my warrior tank right now does something like, I think it's like 22 million damage during the fight. Then you add, and it's never about just one individual either. It's about your whole group. Now, this is not a main tank in trials. You would never main tank in a trial with this. You would off tank with this. Why? Because when you're off tanking, and you're not sitting there throwing out orbs and spear shards and all this other wonderful stuff for your group, you can actually do damage with this build. And that's what makes it really good. It's not your average tank. It's a damage dealing tank. It's made to do damage. And there are other setups, like running Hunting's Rage is really good with this type of a build. Running even Advancing Yodakai with this build is really good because you get a lot of stacks of crit, so you can really build up your crit with this build. And if you adjust the CP a little bit, you can actually put some CP into the penetration. So you can actually get up to about a 10k pen with this build by itself. You won't have as much damage output, but you'll have a greater pen, which will make your damage actually more in the end. But there's a lot of things you can do with this build. And you have to understand, there's two types of tanks. There's your regular tank, your main tank. He's built to tank. Then you have your off tank. And your off tank doesn't mean just offensive. You can make a support off tank who does healing, who does this, who does that. There's a lot of different things you can do. But you want a tank that can do what you want it to do. And if you make a tank, if you make both your tanks, both support tanks, well, you're losing out on some damage that your other tank can do. And when people say tanks can't do damage, wait until the next build. Or sword and shield can't do damage, wait until the next build. But that's pretty much it for the build, guys. I hope you guys like it. I love this build. It's one of my favorites to play. Has been for a long time. And yes, I even to this day still play this every once in a while. So, if you do like the build, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me, you can hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye!